without the true honor. So let's get it, yeah, see what we can uncover.
One that defies your world, keeps you true and life. One that excels, special reminder, guide your way through this shadow world.
Cut the deck. It's shuffle time. You are listening to Don't Take It Personally, a podcast that does a deep dive deep into the heart of each one of Atlus Games' famous Persona video game installments. I'm one of your hosts, back after a stupid long absence. I'm Mayor Howard Vander.
And I'm Medium Hollow.
Yes, you can find us yucking it up on Twitter. I think it's still fun because I have a positive attitude. And a lot of that positivity is formed by, the excitement of this project. And there's nothing quite like the Persona games. And if nothing else, it's just nice to focus on the unique experience that each of them gives you. So on that note, we're actually following our wildly successful thank you all for your glowing feedback from our first episode looking at Revelations: Persona. Colon matters, people. And it also matters in the follow-up game, which you can argue in true Persona fashion. There are actually two sequels, because this episode we're looking at 1999's Persona 2: Innocent Sin, and 2000's Persona 2: Eternal Punishment.
Wait. I've got to cut in. There are two Persona 2s?
Yeah, there's two Persona 2s, so it's literally like I'm seeing double here. 4 Persona sequels.
So are they both a sequel to Persona 1, or is Persona 2 2 a sequel to Persona 2 1?
Okay, so Persona 2: Eternal Punishment, Eternal Punishment. That one, apparently, it's my understanding, did not get released overseas until way later, whereas Persona 2: Innocent Sin, that actually wasn't released in North America either until it came out in 2011 for the PSP. But that one comes out in 99 on the PlayStation, like most of the Persona ones. Japanese-only release. They just got a whole different way of doing things, as reflected by the games that we're getting into. But I guess maybe before we start, though, on the nature of sequels in general, I guess let me put it to you as a cultural connoisseur. What do you think, what words or concepts come to mind when you think of a sequel to a popular, unique, or a lightning in a bottle franchise, whether Persona or anything else?
Well, really, I think that there are 3 types of sequels. I think there are the sequels that are exactly as good or on par with the movie that they follow. I think that there are some sequels that are transcendently better than the original material. I think Mad Max Fury Road is a good example of that. I think, I think Toy Story 2 is an example of the middle one, where a movie is exactly as good as its preceding. I think they're both nearly perfect films. I mean, who doesn't love Toy Story? And then an example of a sequel that is way worse, I think, than the original is either Rocky 2, or on an even more dramatic note, I would say Quantum of Solace, because it felt like a 2-hour-long addendum to Casino Royale, whereas Casino Royale itself is a phenomenal movie.
Well, see, that's the thing. Everybody loves Casino Royale. I never quite saw it in quite the same terms. Maybe that's also because, some people say that, your, speaking of sequels, your favorite Bond film is the first one you're old enough to truly appreciate. For me, that's GoldenEye. That's always going to have a special place in my heart. Itself an amazing video game. But I think you're right that, in a facile categorization, sequels are either going to be as good, better than, or worse than. But there's degrees of it, right? Because I think it's lazy and cynical to just be like, oh, they're making a sequel. They're cashing in on it. They're just looking to make money. In some cases, like Marvel, well, I mean, kind of by design, that's what the film studio aims to do as a business model. But I think taking the view that sequels are inherently cynical or commercial, in a sense, kind of betrays the fact that, as you note, a lot of them are either as good or improve upon, but more importantly, that they retain the same spirit or essence of the original work, and they understand why it's enjoyable in the first place. And I think as long as the sequel can kind of pull that off, or gives the sense that the people making the second one appreciated the first one enough that like they realized why it is worth continuing, they realize what people get out of it as a narrative or gaming object. As long as you maintain that spirit, I think people will always sort of see it as successful to some degree.
I think a really good example of that is actually Evil Dead 2. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I actually have a copy of If Chins Could Kill, autographed by Bruce Campbell. He wrote, "Hey Howard, stay groovy, Bruce." Me and my mom drove to a bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan when that was coming out, just because Bruce Campbell was going to be there. I'm like, I am never going to get another chance. I probably could have waited until he came to Minneapolis, but I was that kind of kid and that kind of excited. Of the original trilogy, Evil Dead 2 is my favorite one.
And I think that even though Army of Darkness is technically the third movie of the series, I think it feels more like, because Evil Dead 2 is a bit of a retcon that's just called 2, Army of Darkness is the true sequel of that set of movies, I think. And that one really holds the same reverence, I think, for the source material and dials up and further into just the wacky zaniness of the environment and the characters that they're presenting.
Well, I think it's very interesting looking at the Evil Dead trilogy, because what a lot of people kind of forget is how different in both tone and style the films are from one another. Because the original Evil Dead, it's a very straight-laced horror film, or at least, attempting to make a serious horror film. Obviously, there's light moments and laugh lines with the characters, like when he gives the toast and then the other dude who's not Bruce Campbell, he's like, what does that mean? It means party down. But, that's like in the early goings. Whereas Evil Dead 2 is very much more leaning into the comedic part of black comedy. But, like, still, Bruce Campbell making crazy faces and laughing with all the furniture in a room hysterically, yes, that's funny, but it's not strictly comedy, Whereas Army of Darkness, though, ultimately becomes a very goofy sort of ode to, like, Ray Harryhausen and the sort of sword and sandal kind of adventure film, to the point where I think you can almost make the argument that none of the Evil Dead films are really that related to one another, other than Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi and shared lore.
Well, I think that we need to take a second and realize that we're getting away from the original subject of this conversation, which is sequels in video games. So
yes.
With that in
Before
mind,
we note that, though, because I just don't want to forget, I think it's also great, though, because Sam Raimi has another famous trilogy, Spider-Man, and you can see a similar progression, because the first one is kind of like aiming to set the template of a different kind of cinema. The second one takes everything about the first one, does it better, bigger, and more satisfyingly. And then the third one is just this goofy, unserious, wacky adventure film. But yes, none of those movies are video games. Back to your point.
So I was talking to my wife earlier today, and she's a big fan of the Spyro games. And I asked her which was the best, and she told me it's Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage. Now, I've never
Okay.
played any of the Spyro games, so I started grilling her about it. I said,
I played the first one while I was babysitting once and only once.
I personally am terrible at 3D platformers, so I tend to just avoid them entirely. But
If I may, you personally.
fair enough. That is a good point. But so I asked her, what is it that makes it better? And she said, well, it is the one that I played as a kid, so it's the one I have the most nostalgia for. So I think that's
Ah.
something that we're kind of forgetting to talk about in regards to sequels as well. Sometimes maybe our judgment is a little clouded, or we see them more favorably or less favorably compared to source material based on when we encountered those sequels as younger people.
Well, true, but I think you're kind of framing that as maybe more of a negative distortion than I think it really is, because obviously, like, when we encounter certain objects, it's very firmly linked to who we are at that time and place and that moment in time, right? And our experience of objects is always going to be subjective, right? Look at Roland Barthes' Death of the Author. Doesn't mean what people think it means. It's rather that meaning itself is not unilaterally dictated, because meaning is produced for the consumer, the viewer, the spectator, the gamer. Meaning is produced via the relationship between them, the creator of a text, and the text itself. And so there's always going to be a subjective element to how one feels about a work. So, yes, I mean, I think you're right. Like the James Bond idea, your first one is your best one. The first cut is the deepest, if I didn't hate Cat Stevens so much. And I think that's perfectly normal, though. I think that's kind of how we're sort of, by design, forced to consume and experience media. Now, the ugly side of that, though, is sequels or more of a reboot, like the Lady Ghostbusters, which, I mean, obviously there was a huge backlash about betraying the original. And I think a lot of that was motivated in bad faith, but like the idea that Ghostbusters and your memory of that is a constituent part of your self-identity years after the fact. I mean, that sounds silly, but at the same time, I wouldn't be the person I am if I didn't happen upon Devo when I was a teenager, right? So is it that different?
I wouldn't go around admitting that too much in public.
What's wrong with being a Devo fan? You're the one who lives in Ohio.
There's a difference between being a Devo fan and saying that your entire character would be different were it not for Devo.
But if you make one change, like 10 years back in your life, like invariably that leads to contingencies upon contingencies, to the point where even one different decision a short point in time ago, that has a profoundly different effect. Speaking of which, we were talking earlier today, and also video games, Zero Escape. You've never heard of these?
No, you brought them up earlier, but I've literally never heard of this game before.
Okay, so they were made by Spike Chunsoft, who is very similar to Atlus, which we'll get back to in time. But so I know from previous talks, like you actually like light novels as a mode of storytelling and engagement. You are wired to them. Imagine a light novel that has interactive sequences where you have to more or less solve escape room type Saw puzzles, and it's done in a very anime stylization, and it's 3 different games that actually tell one continuous story involving multiple overlapping timelines and contingencies upon contingencies.
So, exactly like Persona 3.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that one next episode, but very similar to it, And I guess the idea is the other thing that we often forget about, like the idea of something being a sequel in spirit or a stealth sequel. Like, have you ever seen Streets of Fire?
No.
What really, you need to fix that. Streets of Fire is amazing. Like, it's not a good movie, but it's amazing. Michael Pare, though, who was kind of like the action star that wasn't, like he was in that, Eddie and the Cruisers, and then just didn't work. He plays a character named Tom Cody, who's like this sort of mercenary, amorphous soldier of fortune. He's the cool guy. He's our hero. Apparently, like in the late 2000s or something, there was some like low-budget Mexican-made action film starring Michael Pare, but like there's apparently like all these intimations that he's actually playing the same character, Tom Cody. You ever encounter like something like that where it's like you don't realize it's a sequel to something?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me when I'm thinking about spiritual sequels is probably Seven Psychopaths following in Bruges.
Yeah, they definitely have a tonal similarity.
Especially being the follow-up from the same director, I think that
Also with Colin Farrell. That's my Colin Farrell impression.
it's really good. I'd say you're right there.
Yeah, it's we need more cowbell. That's my Colin Farrell, Will Ferrell impression.
That's close, but I'd say
Yeah.
you need to work on it a little bit more.
I got a fever, and the only cure. Now that's Colin Farrell doing Christopher Walken impression.
Christopher Walken is one of the all-time greats. Just like the subject of today's episode, Persona 2,
And
Innocent
funny
Sin.
enough, though, Christopher Walken was also in Seven Psychopaths.
He has the best scene in Seven Psychopaths, actually, outside of the Tom Waits vignette. Is vignette
yes.
the right word?
It's more sequence, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's close.
Because technically it's not a vignette because, like, he has more than one scene, but also, like, the noteworthy flashback, if that's the one you mean.
Yeah.
That's technically a montage.
It doesn't feel like a montage, though.
Well,
'Cause when you think of a montage, obviously the first thing that comes to mind is Rocky running up the stairs, and I'd say
Right.
that those are wildly different.
And it's, in a strict sense, anything that involving editing is montage. So, I mean, was it Robin Wood, I think, who said, any term so broad it can explain everything, ultimately has nothing useful to say about anything. So, yeah, okay. But you mean the same one where it's him and his lover as the serial killers through time?
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a
So-
good scene. There's a lot surprising moments of romantic sweetness in the course of that movie.
And not too few of them from Sam Rockwell himself.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a lovable energy in that film. I also really appreciate that they, when they're at the movie theater, they're actually watching Takeshi Kitano's Violent Cop. And normally I hate that kind of thing when directors are like, I'm just going to drop in that I happen to know this kind of esoteric, sort of cult beloved movie. You probably wouldn't have heard of it. This one gets a pass because Seven Psychopaths is a good movie. And now here I am assigning different criteria based on my own personal experience of a work. I guess I'm not so different from your wife in a strict sense.
You have the same mohawk, too.
That's
That
true.
helps.
Also, your wife is named Howard?
Yes, the jig
Yeah.
is up. Her name is Howard.
And if Colin Farrell was doing a Borat impression, he'd probably call her, Ach, my wife.
But to be fair, her name is Howard due to a joke from the perspective of her dad, whose name was Kim.
Yeah, and I remember once over Frescas, you told me, and I don't know if this is actually what happened, but that your wife's parents were filling out like the birth registry, and they were like, what's a name that we should give to our beautiful baby girl? And right then, like one of the doctors came in and was like, "How are you two making out?" And like it's that thing where you're writing something and you hear a word and you write that by mistake. And now you know the rest of the story. Oh.
Yeah, that's exactly how it went down.
Yeah. Oh shit. Sorry, my alarm's going off. I got to switch over my laundry. So that may be a good time to wind this one up. That being said, I think after a bit of a break, there's a bit of rust to shake off. But obviously I'm biased, but I think this episode was a return to form. And once again, as bizarre as Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Persona 2 the other one can be at times, I think it was also really fun just looking at them up close and figuring out why they are the way that they are. So any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, until next time, we art thou and thou art we.
Oh, yes. I forgot that was one of our lines that we used. Or should I say that thou art we should have used? Okay, well, that's enough horsing around because my neighbors really don't like when I'm late switching over my laundry. In the meantime, Hollow, where can people reach out to you?
If they wanted to, people could reach out to me at Medium Hollow on Twitter. That's a second M after medium in Medium Hollow. It'll be
Yes.
the second M after the second M.
There's 3 M's in total. Just remember, if you want to talk to Hollow, use a Post-it note because they were designed by 3M. And okay, Jesus Christ, 1 second. All right, I got to wind this up. At Vander I am. Email us at personallypod@gmail.com. And yeah, we'll be back with a new episode before long. So until then, you phantom thieves of hearts, whatever you may do in your time upon this earth, make sure that you don't take it personally. Sorry, I think we lagged a bit. You want to try that again? Shit, you're cutting out. Okay, all right, we'll do this next time.